Section 56 of The Valley of the Moon by Jack London. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 3, Chapter 21. It was on a bright June morning that Billy told Saxon to put on her riding clothes to try out a saddle horse. Not until after 10 o'clock, she said. By that time, I'll have the wagon off on a second trip. Despite the extent of the business she had developed, her executive ability and system gave her much spare time. She could call on the Hales, which was ever a delight, especially now that the Hastings were back and that Clara was often at her aunt's. In this congenial atmosphere, Saxon burgeoned. She had begun to read with understanding. And she had time for her books, for her work on her pretties, and for Billy, whom she accompanied on many expeditions. Billy was even busier than she, his work being more scattered and diverse. And as well, he kept his eye on the home barn and horses which Saxon used. In truth, he had become a man of affairs, though Mrs. Mortimer had gone over his accounts with an eagle eye on the expense column, discovering several minor leaks, and finally, aided by Saxon, bullied him into keeping books. Each night after supper, he and Saxon posted their books. Afterward, in the big Morris chair he had insisted on buying early in the days of his brickyard contract, Saxon would creep into his arms and strum on the ukulele, or they would talk long about what they were doing and planning to do. Now it would be, "I'm mixing up in politics, Saxon. It pays. You bet it pays. If by next spring I ain't got half a dozen teams working on the roads and pulling down the county money, it's me back to Oakland and asking the boss for a job." Or Saxon, "They're really starting that new hotel between Caliente and Eldridge, and there's some talk of a big sanitarium back in the hills." Or it would be, "Billy, now that you've piped that acre, you've just got to let me have it for my vegetables. I'll rent it from you. I'll take your own estimate for all the alfalfa you can raise on it and pay you full market price less the cost of growing it." "It's all right, take it." Billy suppressed a sigh. "Besides, I'm too busy to fool with it now." Which prevarication was barefaced by virtue of his just having installed the ram and piped the land. "It will be wisest, Billy," she soothed, for she knew his dream of land spaciousness was stronger than ever. "You don't want to fool with an acre. There's that 140. We'll buy it yet, if old Chavon ever dies. Besides, it really belongs to Medrano Ranch. The two together were the original quarter section." "I don't wish no man's death," Billy grumbled, "but he ain't getting no good out of it, overpasturing it with a lot of scrub animals. I've sized it up, every inch of it. There's at least 40 acres in the 3 cleared fields, with water in the hills behind to beat the band. The horse feed I could raise on it take your breath away. Then there's at least 50 acres I could run my brood mares on, pasture mixed up with trees and steep places and such. The other 50's just thick woods and pretty places and wild game. And that old adobe barn's all right. With a new roof, it'd shelter any amount of animals in bad weather. Look at me now, renting that measly pasture back of Ping's just to run my resting animals. They could run into 140 if I only had it. I wonder if Chavon would lease it." Or less ambitious, Billy would say, "I got to skin over to Petaluma tomorrow, Saxon. There's an auction on the Atkinson Ranch, and maybe I can pick up some bargains." More horses? "Ain't I got 2 teams hauling lumber for the new winery? And Barney's got a bad shoulder sprain. He'll have to lay off a long time if he's to get it in shape. And Bridget ain't ever going to do tap work again. I can see that sticking out. I've doctored her and doctored her. She's fooled the vet, too. And some of the other horses has got to take a rest. The span of grays is showing the hard work, and the big roan's going loco. Everybody thought it was his teeth, but it ain't. It's straight loco. It's money in the pocket to take care of your animals, and horses is the delicatest things on four legs. Sometimes, if I can ever see my way to it, I'm going to ship a carload of mules from Colusa County. Big, heavy ones, you know. They'd sell like hot cakes in the valley here. Them I didn't want for myself. Or in a lighter vein, Billy, by the way, Saxon, talking of accounts, what do you think Hazel and Hattie is worth? Fair market price? Why? I'm asking you. Well, say, what you paid for them, $300? Billy considered deeply. They're worth a whole lot more, but let it go at that. And now getting back to accounts, suppose you write me a check for $300. Oh, robber. You can't show me. Why, Saxon, when I let you have grain and hay from my carloads, don't you give me a check for it? And you know how you're stuck on keeping your accounts down to the penny, he teased. If you're any kind of businesswoman, you just got to charge your business with them 2 horses. I ain't had the use of 'em since I don't know when. But the colts will be yours, she argued. Besides, I can't afford brood mares in my business. In almost no time now, Hazel and Hattie will have to be taken off from the wagon. They're too good for it anyway. And you keep your eyes open for a pair to take their place. I'll give you a check for that pair, but no commission. All right, Billy conceded. Hazel and Hattie come back to me, but you can pay me rent for the time you did use 'em. If you make me, I'll charge you board, she threatened. And if you charge me board, I'll charge you interest for the money I've stuck into this shebang. You can't, Saxon laughed. It's community property. He grunted spasmodically, as if the breath had been knocked out of him. Straight on the solar plexus, he said, and me down for the count. But say them sweet words, ain't they? Community property. He rolled them over and off his tongue with keen relish. And when we got married, the top of our ambition was a steady job and some rags and sticks of furniture all paid up and half worn out. We wouldn't have had any community property only for you. What nonsense. What could I have done by myself? You know very well that you earned all the money that started us here. You paid the wages of Go Yum and Chan Chi, and old Hughie and Mrs. Paul, and, why, you've done it all. She drew her 2 hands caressingly across his shoulders and down along his great biceps muscles. That's what did it, Billy. Aw, hell, it's your head that done it. What was my muscle good for with no head to run 'em? Slugging scabs, beating up lodgers, and crooking the elbow over a bar? The only sensible thing my head ever done was when it run me into you. Honest to God, Saxon, you've been the making of me. Aw, hell, Billy, she mimicked in the way that delighted him. Where would I have been if you hadn't taken me out of the laundry? I couldn't take myself out. I was just a helpless girl. I'd have been there yet if it hadn't been for you. Mrs. Mortimer had $5,000, but I had you. A woman ain't got a chance to help herself that a man has, he generalized. I'll tell you what, it took the 2 of us. It's been teamwork. We've run in a span. If we run a single, you might still be in the laundry, and if I was lucky, I'd be driving my team by day and sporting around to cheap dances. Saxon stood under the father of all madronos, watching Hazel and Hattie go out the gate, the full vegetable wagon behind them, when she saw Billy ride in, leading a sorrel mare from whose silken coat the sun flashed golden lights. 4 years old, high life, a handful, but no vicious tricks, Billy chanted as he stopped beside Saxon. Skin like tissue paper, mouth like silk, but kill the toughest bronco ever foaled. Look at them lungs and nostrils. They call her Ramona, some Spanish name, sired by Morlita, out of genuine Morgan stock. And they will sell her, Saxon gasped, standing with hands clasped in inarticulate delight. "That's what I brought her to show you for." "But how much must they want for her?" was Saxon's next question. So impossible did it seem that such an amazement of horseflesh could ever be hers. "That ain't your business," Billy answered brusquely. "The brickyard's payin' for her, not the vegetable ranch. She's yours at the word. What d'ye say?" "I'll tell you in a minute." Saxon was trying to mount, but the animal danced nervously away. "Hold on till I tie," Billy said. "She ain't skirt broke, that's the trouble." Saxon tightly gripped the reins and mane, stepped with spurred foot on Billy's hand, and was lifted lightly into the saddle. "She's used to spurs," Billy called after her. "Spanish broke, so don't check her quick. Come in gentle, and talk to her. She's high life, you know." Saxon nodded, dashed out the gate and down the road, waved a hand to Clara Hastings as she passed the gate of Trillium Covert, and continued up Wild Water Canyon. When she came back, Ramona in a pleasant lather, Saxon rode to the rear of the house, past the chicken houses and the flourishing berry rows, to join Billy on the rim of the bench, where he sat on his horse in the shade, smoking a cigarette. Together they looked down through an opening among the trees to the meadow, which was a meadow no longer. With mathematical accuracy it was divided into squares, oblongs, and narrow strips, which displayed sharply the thousand hues of green of a truck garden. Go Yum and Chan Chi, under enormous Chinese grass hats, were planting green onions. Old Hughie, hoe in hand, plodded along the main artery of running water, opening certain laterals, closing others. From the workshed beyond the barn, the strokes of a hammer told Saxon that Carlson was wire binding vegetable boxes. Mrs. Paul's cheery soprano, lifted in a hymn, floated through the trees, accompanied by the whir of an egg beater. A sharp barking told where Possum still waged hysterical and baffled war on the Douglas squirrels. Billy took a long draw from his cigarette, exhaled the smoke, and continued to look down at the meadow. Saxon divined trouble in his manner. His rein hand was on the pommel, and her free hand went out and softly rested on his. Billy turned his slow gaze upon her mare's lather, seeming not to note it, and continued on to Saxon's face. "Huh," he equivocated, as if waking up. "Them San Leandro Portuguese ain't got nothing on us when it comes to intensive farming. Look at that water running. You know, it seems so good to me that sometimes I just want to get down on hands and knees and lap it all up myself." "Oh, to have all that water you want in a climate like this!" Saxon exclaimed. "And don't be scared of it ever going back on you. If the rain's fooled you, there's Sonoma Creek alongside. All we gotta do is install a gasoline pump." "But we'll never have to, Billy. I was talking with Redwood Thompson. He's lived in the valley since '53, and he says there's never been a failure of crops on account of drought. We always get our rain." "Come on, let's go for a ride," he said abruptly. "You got the time?" "All right, if you'll tell me what's bothering you." He looked at her quickly. "Nothing," he grunted. "Yes, there is, too. What's the difference? You'd know it sooner or later. You ought to see old Chavon. His face is that long he can't walk without bumping his knees on his chin. His gold mine's petering out." "Gold mine?" "His clay pit. It's the same thing. He's getting 20 cents a yard for it from the brickyard." "And that means the end of your teaming contract." Saxon saw the disaster in all its hugeness. "What about the brickyard people?" "Worried to death, though they've kept secret about it. They've had men out punching holes all over the hills for a week, and that Jap chemist setting up nights analyzing the rubbish they've brought in. It's peculiar stuff, that clay, for what they want it for, and you don't find it everywhere. Them experts that reported on Chavon's pit made one hell of a mistake. Maybe they was lazy with their boring. Anyway, they slipped up on the amount of clay there was in it. Now don't get to bothering. It'll come out somehow. You can't do nothing." "But I can," Saxon insisted. "We won't buy Ramona." "You ain't got a thing to do with that," he answered. "I'm buying her, and her price don't cut any figure alongside the big game I'm playing. Of course I can always sell my horses, but that puts a stop to their making money, and that brickyard contract was fat." "But if you get some of them in on the road work for the county," she suggested. "Oh, I got that in mind, and I'm keeping my eyes open. There's a chance the quarry will start again, and the fellow that did the teaming has gone to Puget Sound. And what if I have to sell out most of the horses? Here's you in the vegetable business. That's solid. We just don't go ahead so fast for a time, that's all. I ain't scared of the country any more. I sized things up as we went along. There ain't a jerk burg we hit all the time on the road that I couldn't have jumped into and made a go. And now, where do you want to ride?" End of Section 56.